Frederick Ozanam was a French professor at the University of Sorbonne, also a law professor and a professor of medieval literature. He lived in the early 1800s and has been credited as one of the primary founders of the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Thus, he holds a very prestigious place in the history of the Vincentian legacy as an example of recruiting university students and faculty to work on issues of social justice. Paris in the early 1800s was still reeling from the French Revolution. At the same time, it was addressing the early stages of the Industrial Revolution and the massive poverty that resulted in many peasants moving to the city and living under very poor conditions. Ozanam was middle class but relatively privileged and able to attend school, and met with many other students to discuss Catholic issues. Challenged by secularists of the time about how could Catholics show they really meant what they talked about in terms of Christian charity and love, he banded with a group of others to begin to look at how to resolve, or at least how to address, issues of poverty in Paris. Ironically, as men of privilege, they had to go to a daughter of charity, Sister Rosalie Rondeau, who worked in one of the districts in Paris through her church in having soup kitchens and working with the poor, to learn even how to meet the poor and how to deal with the poor. But they were good learners. And Ozanam learned very quickly that one could be intellectual about charity and poverty and justice, but it wasn't until you actually climbed the stairs and met the poor, met the homeless, met those who were sick, who had no food or wood to heat their stoves, carrying the wood up several flights of stairs and bringing the equivalent of what we would consider food stamps. And what a great learning place for students. What a great learning place for him as a faculty member. The spirit of the St. Vincent de Paul Society grew quickly. In fact, one of the early battles was, do you have more than one conference? Do you have more than one chapter? But the success of students learning to work to address issues of social justice in Paris was remarkable. What a role model for us today. Universities can often be islands of places of retreat to study and to think about the poor, but perhaps never meet the poor. Ozanam gives us a model to replicate and to build upon in our society today, to test one's theories of how Catholic social thinking about social justice, Catholic social thinking about economics, Catholic social thinking about how we allocate resources in the world. We're living in a time when many of the assumptions about the capitalist system and whether laissez-faire markets are the best way for justice are being challenged by a world economic order that has really been shaken to its core by some of the failures of those assumptions. Ozanam could help us in thinking about what we need to do today in terms of what is the common good. What is someone who accepts Catholic social thinking dealing with in terms of employment, of a natural wage? Ozanam argued that society had an obligation to pay what he would call a natural wage, which today proponents call a living wage. That we had an obligation to look for pensions or provisions for retired workers. We're struggling with health care today. We need to look at those issues and ask, what are our values? What are our teachings? What does it mean to be for the common good in a society that most recently has championed individual, rugged individualism, their material wealth, and make us really struggle with that, and do so in a university environment where, after having that contact with individuals who don't have the same privileges, coming back and then writing, researching, talking with our colleagues, with our students, about how God would want us to live in a more just world. Ozanam dedicated his life to that endeavor. He was a great scholar. Some of his work is still studied today, but he also took his scholarship to invite his students to engage in this great cause of social justice.